I remember the way that we were notified was my dad could not read, and so he couldn't read his name. And there's this big board that is right in the middle of the refugee camp. And when your name is on there, like my dad didn't know if his name was on there. He heard it from a neighbor who could read. And the thing about it was at the refugee camp, people knew of each other. And so my dad was notified by somebody that he knew that knew him. And when we
Mhm.
went to go check, my dad realized that that was him. And so then from there, it was interviews after processing of making sure that we weren't affiliated with any terrorist groups or any of that stuff, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then it was a 3-year process. And then finally in 2005, we were on a plane to come to America. Life gave me a second chance. We were the one family that were selected from 250,000 people to come to America.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Linda Mitchell, and I am so excited that you've joined me for Literacy Journeys with Linda. My guest today is very special. His name is Salat Ali, and he's
Yes,
going to tell you about his literacy journey, and it's riveting. So, thank you so much for joining me, Salat.
it's a pleasure to be here. So I joined the military 2022. I joined the Air Force. My rank is Airman First Class or A1C or E3. Those are all different ways that you can say my rank
Well,
are.
let's start by telling people where you're from. And the background is that I
Yeah.
understand your father couldn't read and
Yeah.
you couldn't
Oh,
read. So, where were you born?
so I was born in a refugee camp in Kenya, the northern regions of Kenya.
Sure.
I was born there because my parents fled the civil war that was happening in Somalia in 1992. And from there, it was just sort of difficult. And it was difficult for my dad, it was difficult for my mom, and it was even more difficult when both of them divorced in the refugee camp. And I had to basically take some responsibilities in terms of like looking after my brother and cooking for him while my dad looked for food, and we were like that for the first 11 years of my life. It was just all about just surviving the
You
night
spent 11 years in a refugee camp in Kenya.
my first 11 years of my life. Yes.
Okay, that's quite a hardship.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us
There,
about your education.
so in the refugee camp there were there were two schools, which is equivalent to like going to Sunday school right here, right?
Hmm.
Like people who are practicing the faith, like Christianity, to like learn about the religion and all that stuff. We have the same thing, but I practice Islam.
Sure.
And so we would go learn about the scriptures and all that stuff. And then there was a second school, which is the regular schools like here, where we learn about like math, science, English. For me, I never really focused on like education in some way because I felt like I wasn't gonna live for long. And so like there wasn't any sort of purpose to like apply myself and to learn, because there was something deep down in me that I always felt like, the day that my father isn't like alive anymore, or like if he works his way, if he works himself to death, then there's not much that like I will not be alive, like I won't live, if that makes sense. So to me, education was just one of those things that was just kind of in the back of my head. Like we didn't prioritize it, if that makes sense.
But did you apply yourself to learn your lessons?
In
Mm.
the refugee camp, no, because it was more of just like, yeah, you learn these things, but at the end of the day, you still got to go do labor work. What's the point, that's the way that in our head, that's what we were thinking. Basic sort of stuff. Farming was the big one. You can just kind of go do that. Why go learn to do anything? That's what going on in our heads.
You didn't see hope.
There was no hope. The biggest thing that I think we clinged on to as hope was religion. And
Hmm.
the praying of that one day maybe we could get out of the refugee camp, and that maybe some miracle might happen. That's what we were kind of like hoping for, and it finally happened.
How did it happen, Salat?
The United Nations selects families through lottery.
Mm.
And once these families are selected, then they go through a 3-year interview processes where medical, they interview you, they see like they do, it's a difficult process where you
Whew.
got a lot of waiting. We were going on the back of a truck going all the way to the UN compound.
Now tell me your age. This is what age is this happening?
Like 6, 7, somewhere there. I remember the way that we were notified was my dad could not read, and so he couldn't read his name. And there's this big board that is right in the middle of the refugee camp. And when your name is on there, like my dad didn't know if his name was on there. He heard it from a neighbor who could read. And the thing about it was at the refugee camp, people knew of each other. And so my dad was notified by somebody that he knew that knew him. And when we
Mhm.
went to go check, my dad realized that that was him. And so then from there, it was interviews after processing of making sure that we weren't affiliated with any terrorist groups or any of that stuff, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then it was a 3-year process. And then finally in 2005, we were on a plane to come to America. And I remember as soon as like I realized, we passed the interview process and now we had the green light to come to America, I remember feeling this huge hope, this huge
Mm.
hope. And I remember
Finally.
this huge hope where it was like, I can actually dream. I can become something. I can become anything that I want. There's now life will be different in a good way, but it's also scary because we don't know what we're going to. We don't know what things will look like. We don't know what state we're going into. We don't know what city we're going into. And we didn't even know what these were. We were just these refugee people. To me, I never seen life outside of the refugee camp. There was not. Does that make sense? Like I was just
It's hard to fathom that you didn't know what America was, Europe, you didn't
just
know what these places were.
Yep. And every time somebody talked about America, they talked about it like it was heaven on earth, and that's sort of yeah, I'm
Streets
not,
paved with gold.
that's exactly what they were telling us. Honest to God, it's paved with gold and the trees
Wow.
are made out of money and there's money just on the ground and all you do is you
Okay.
school, like, so it was like that dreamy stuff that everybody wanted. And it was one of those things that soon as you hear that you're coming to America, you're like, wow, I'm gonna be a part of something that's awesome and I can become anything that I want. Like our struggles to survive is finally coming to an end, and now we're gonna start a new life and we're hoping where we can become anything, and that's what I feel like life sort of began for me, because I felt like I could be anything that I want now, and that I can now apply myself. It was just me, my brother, and my dad, all of us with one small suitcase coming to
Wow.
New York, no English, nothing. We just felt alone in a country where we couldn't read, we couldn't speak. We were just using basic sort of signs, to kind of like navigate our way. They finally hear the first words in Somali in New York, where this guy was sent to come pick us up.
Sure.
And like, oh, we were so scared. I started crying. We're like, man, this is, like we don't know what's going on. We don't know where we're going, and we can't speak the language here. It was hard. We can't read and all that stuff. As soon as we heard like Somali words, we were like just started crying because like
Yes.
it was we were that scared. You have 3 months to assimilate, find a job, find a car, all that stuff to basically become a functioning member of society. Um,
Yes, but you don't have it's a lot. You don't have the skills um, for modern society in America and a
yep,
city. The reading, the literacy. You said
yep.
your dad couldn't read. Tell us about how you overcame those obstacles. What happened?
We were still on survival mode, if that makes sense.
But inside those Salat, it sounds like you still had hope now, though.
Yes. I remember wearing my first backpack. I remember, having many different pairs of like clothing now. I remember going to school and I remember sitting in class. Every day I would sit down, I'm like listening to my teachers, but I don't know what they're saying, right? I'm
Mm.
just sitting there and I'm
Hmm.
just watching somebody speak in a completely different language that I have nothing about. I know nothing about. And all I can do is just sit down so that I don't disturb anybody, right?
You know what? I'm listening to you now. Perfect English, diction, everything, vocabulary. Take us from that 11-year-old boy to now you're in college. How did you learn to speak English and read?
That's
Woo.
a that's a great question. There were a lot of things that I think that played very critical, important parts to me learning English.
Yes.
I would say the number one thing that really helped me out, I would say time. The first thing that I needed to learn was English. I will not be able to read or I will not be able to understand anything, right? And to go into my ear to for me to comprehend anything was the first thing that I needed to learn was English. So understand when people are talking to me so that I can understand literacy. It took me 2 years to learn the language. No, it took me, I think, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And the second thing that I'd say that helped me out was ESL, English as a second language. It was
Yeah.
we had the courses, and in ESL was we would learn about the alphabet, right? A, B, C, and then
Sure.
first, yeah, figure all that out. First, memorize the alphabet. That was one. And
Right.
then and then after that, it was what pronunciations do all these alphabets make, right? What does
Yes.
A make? What does
Yes.
B, what sound does B make? What
Right.
does C make? What does
Yes.
D make? Right? Once I figured that out, right, and then we would make these sounds in ESL class.
Yes. Of
Like
course.
the teacher would point at A, and then he would be like, "What sound does this make?" And it would be like, right, or
Uh-huh.
like, "What
Right.
about what about this? What is like pointing at B? What does B make?" Buh, right? And then we're
Yes.
just going about them that way. That helped me out a lot. The biggest things that I also say really helped me out with me actually learning English was like watching movies, watch it. Whether you believe it or not,
I
watching
hear that. I hear that a lot. What's
is the biggest
people come
thing
to
that.
this country say, we just started watching television.
Yep, I just started watching television. Things like that were really helpful because not only were they helping me with like my literature, but they were also helping me with English. And the other thing was just kind of like figuring out how do I sound like the regular American person, you know. And I remember the reason why it was like I think I've experienced some bullying when I was younger,
Mm.
and it was because like, and I remember being like getting bullied because like not being able to speak English and also like not sounding like an American person. So I
Mm.
remember kind of like really listening to like the way the words sound and having to like kind of work on the way I say them.
Well, Salat, you really applied yourself. Unlike in the refugee camp, once you got here to the States, you applied yourself to learn everything about how to speak English. I'm wondering about your dad. How was he doing? Because he didn't know how to read at all when or he didn't even recognize his name. How's he doing? What happened with him?
My father's journey is a little bit different than mine. My dad, let me see what age my dad came here at like in his late 50s, early 60s.
Mhm. But he was born in Somalia, right?
He was born in Somalia. My father actually witnessed the war.
Yeah.
He was forced to join a tribe to like
Mhm.
the rebels, where they basically told him, "You have no choice. Either you join us or we end your life." My father witnessed a lot of things and he was traumatized by the war. He walked for days into the refugee camp.
Mhm.
He explained a lot of stories of how, they felt so unsafe that like, they would dig the ground somewhere and then like kind of keep their head out where that
Mm-hmm.
is the only thing that's showing and that they try to like be right in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
My dad came here. My dad has been on survival mode for a really long time. He suffers from
Yes.
PTSD.
Uh-huh.
Um, and when he came here, I feel like my father's brain never came down. It
Mhm.
never rested, and
Yeah.
it never believed that it was not on survival mode anymore. That transition
Mhm.
just never happened for him. So for him, in order to like um comprehend anything, it's to let your brain know that you're not surviving anymore. You're not on survival mode anymore. My dad never left that.
Mhm.
So to grasp new information, I felt that is a lot harder for my father
Mhm.
because there's a lot going on in here. And him also coming at like a late age did
Mhm.
not help as well.
Mhm.
So you have to look at things from like a confidence issue as well, right? There's a confidence thing, right? Like if you're learning something new, you have to be willing to be like, I don't know. My dad has a protective sort of like a barrier of his own, like, like self-esteem,
Yes.
right? And it's like, how do you, you know, educate yourself in a way where your self-esteem doesn't get in the way? So there's been a lot of psychological barrier for my dad. He's been in America for 19 years.
Mhm.
He never picked up the language. And I
Okay.
think I he never picked up the language and he never learned to read because every time he tries to apply himself, I think his self-esteem gets in the way, right? And then there's also, that psychological part of his brain where it still thinks it's on survival mode. And my dad just never came down. And then now he also had another thing where in order for you to get your US citizenship, you have to take a US citizenship test. My
Yeah.
dad he could not grasp the information that was needed.
Right.
The thing is this, the thing that saved my father was this. A study saved my dad. There's a psychology study that's been done where a person who suffers from PTSD actually struggles grasping new information.
Yeah.
Um,
The way you
and so,
explained.
yep. And this study actually was accepted into consideration when it came to people who were refugees.
Yeah.
My dad has gun wounds on him. So he went to the doctors, showed that my dad had a learning disability because of PTSD that he experienced from the war. And my dad was waived from getting, he was waived that from that test, the citizenship test, and got his citizenship that way because my dad is missing a toe. There's
Yeah.
a lot of like gun wounds on his body from the war.
Sure.
So because of this study, it saved my father. I had a full ride from to a private university. And
Wow.
when I was there, I realized that the neighborhood that I came from was not a good neighborhood. Because I remember the day that that reading finally came together
Mhm.
and I finally read. I remember walking around my neighborhood, going down the same streets that I remember going down, seeing these big words, and I didn't even know what they meant. And finally, this one day where I can go walk this road and I could look and read all the names of the stores and like all the names of the streets and all of that.
Yeah.
And I remember vividly, like now that I realize it, all those store names were all liquor, they all were like liquor
Mhm.
stores. And I remember when I went to college, I went from like all black school where like 80% were all black,
Mhm.
you know, to like being 14% black,
Mhm.
like the only 14% black people going to the university. And I remember people, like talking to me and they're like, why do you talk black? So like, you know,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about when I say that, but like
I do.
why do you talk hood, right? And I just realized again that like I did not come from, because like my first year I struggled so much in college. I was like I remember just emotionally not feeling like I wanted to go back the following year. I was not good academically. I was good academically in the school, in the high school that I was
Oh,
in.
okay, in high school. Uh-huh.
But then when I got to college, my first year, I remember like my grades were so bad that I was put on academic probation, and I was gonna lose my scholarship because I didn't have the necessary tools that everybody else has. And I remember like, I didn't know what syllabus was. I was just, it
Yeah.
was so hard. I didn't know how to ask for help. I feel like people didn't know how to help me either in some ways. And I remember just feeling like, like, man, like this is
Yeah.
a new kind of thing, and it was a new different kind of type of like, way of going about things, and it took me a while to like figure that out. And when I finally did, my grades started to show. And
Right.
when I got the help that I needed, my grades started to show and I got better. But that first year, man,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going back to school anymore. I remember like, man, I'm not enough. My dad, again, this is his mindset of things. My dad, like, he understood the power in that education has,
Mhm.
but like for him, in some ways, again, and like, this is not the typical African dad, in my opinion. Was that my dad just wanted me to work so I could help pay the bills. Just help us with the bills. Like,
Yeah. Don't worry about college. Just help us. Yeah.
I graduated, and then I really took a deep self-evaluation. Um,
Mm.
I read a lot of books.
You read a lot of books.
And I read a lot of books because I realized how much of little information that I knew. I needed to be in the shoes of other people's lives to figure out
Yes.
what type of life do I want? Who am I and who do I want to be? And I know I want to help. How do I want to help? I knew that I wanted to help people because
Hmm.
I feel like God gave me a second chance. I know that. Life gave me a second chance. We were the one family that were selected from 250,000 people to come to America. I think about those people that were even more like there are people that were way smarter than me that are still in that refugee camp. That year after graduating college, I'm thinking about all these things. I know I want to help people. I know I want to use my life to do something good. I know that, how do I see my life? So this is where I got very serious. And I told myself, I'm going to read books. I am going to be in the shoes of many different types of jobs. YouTube was my friend.
Mm.
I could YouTube anything and,
That's right.
you know what I mean?
That's another university.
That's a whole nother university that nobody knows about. Now, a lot of people know about it. So
Yeah.
I just read, gained as much information as possible. And I decided, you know, there were like some degrees that fitted me, and I brought it down to getting my law degree and my MBA. Now, the question was, we're looking at 300,000 student loan, 400,000 student loans. Now I got to sit down and wonder, how can I pay for these? Then I realized, maybe joining the military might be the best way to go about this
Was
because
there any wrestle with you about, because you saw how the military impacted your dad? Did you have any reservations
yeah,
about
yes,
you were?
yes. To be honest with you, there are specific values that I have in my heart that did not align with the military, and I could still see it. But I feel like I'm making the sacrifice in some ways, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the best that I can to look at things from like a different view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, um, I know that I have to make a sacrifice, and I'll be honest, the only reason why, the only reason why I can dream this much is because of the United States and because of coming here. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I'll
You
say
had
that
to say that oath, though, Salat. You had to take that oath.
I took that oath and I did it, and I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to get discharged honorably, and I know that.
Yes.
And I think about those people that would say, this is my country, get out of here, you know, this is my country, you're an immigrant, you're a refugee, why are you here? And those same people who say things like that will never raise their hand like I did, you know? So
Mm.
this is my way of saying I'm more of an American than you will ever be.
That is profound. I certainly appreciate your service, and you have so much wisdom. You said you made some wise choices, and I'm just thinking about your path. It was very hard for you in school, and you got those grades. How is it that you didn't succumb to the outside influences in your neighborhood and get off track? And or maybe you did and got back on track. Was there anything that you had to wrestle with growing up as a teenager? Maybe that, your neighborhood, you said it wasn't good. How did you stay on track with your grades?
I just knew that I wanted to do something good with my life. I knew that I owe it to the people that have not, that 2,000, the 20, 250,000 people that are still in that refugee camp. Um, I knew that I needed to do something with my life. I feel like I got a second chance in life and I should not waste it. Like I knew that if I succumbed to like the neighborhood that I was a part of, or like if I like succumbed to like all of the things that I've seen, I feel like it would have thrown me off track. I also would say that like my religion really helped me out,
Yes,
Islam,
yes.
uh, and it kept me away from a lot of things as well. And I also feel as though that Islam protected me. So thinking about those refugees that are still in the refugee camp, and thinking about the laws of Allah and the laws of Islam, I would say that those things kind of kept me in check.
I want to thank you for sharing your journey with me, Salah. And as we close, I always like to ask my guests, why do you think literacy, reading and writing, is so important and fundamental?
I will say reading and writing is close to being free. It's close to freedom. Reading and writing, you have access to information that could potentially free you. I say this because there are a lot of knowledge that you can gain. You can put yourself in many people's footsteps. You can, you can, I would say you can use it to protect yourself. I believe that reading and writing is like having a layer like open, like like you can have, it's like you have a new view of the world, and it brings you that freedom and that protection that you would need, right? In today's world, right? And I think you can basically become anything that you really want, and like using this. It's such a very important tool that I think a lot of us neglect or like don't realize. But, you know, if you can read your like landlord contract, right? Like if you can read many different like things, like there's a lot of goodness to it, in my opinion. I will say it was the most freeing thing that ever happened to me.
Thank you very much, Salat, for joining me on Literacy Journeys with Linda.
Thank you for
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to Salat Ali. He has shared his journey from being a refugee in Kenya all the way to coming to the United States, and is now on his way to have his MBA and a law degree. And he started out and he didn't even know his ABCs. So, how inspirational is that? Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. It was a nice nostalgia to think about the journey. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on Literacy Journeys with Linda. And if you like these interviews, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of these fabulous stories of people who have made literacy a critical, important part of their journey in life.